This is apropos. Well, months of political tensions here in France may be coming to a head. The far right is threatening to bring down Michel Barnier's minority government in a no-confidence vote as a row simmers over the budget. Under pressure from Marine Le Pen, the Prime Minister has announced a major concession, scrapping plans to introduce a €3 billion tax on electricity in a bid to end a standoff with the opposition. Lauren Burstecker has the details.
Hoping to steer France's minority government out of a deepening political crisis, French Prime Minister Michel Barnier agreed Thursday to scrap plans for an unpopular electricity tax hike. Far-right National Rally leader Jordan Bardella welcomed the move, but warned Barnier only had a few days left to make even more concessions or risk the government's collapse. The Macron administration and the opposition have for weeks been locked in a tense standoff over proposed budget cuts, which the government says are necessary to bring down France's deficit, but which have been widely criticized by the left and the far right. France's left-wing parties, which were left out of the ruling coalition despite coming out on top in September's snap elections, said they would seek a motion of no confidence if Barnier tried to force the budget through.
Mr. Barnier met with the presidents of the Socialists, but rejected all their proposals. So if the government tries to force the budget through, there will be a no-confidence motion, and I will vote for it.
The far right, which now holds the key to the Prime Minister's survival, has sought to capitalize on this position of strength to wring out fresh concessions. It's threatened to support the motion of no confidence if the government didn't do more to curb immigration and lower taxes.
Well, for more on the tense political situation here in France, we're joined by Renaud Foucart, Senior Lecturer in Economics at Lancaster University in the UK. Good to have you with us on the programme this evening. Firstly, in your view, how much danger is Michel Barnier in here?
At the moment, I think it's a very key point for him, because Marine Le Pen is herself in a very difficult situation. So we know that the government is a minority government that only exists because of the support of the far right. But now Marine Le Pen herself is threatened by a trial for embezzlement of public funds. So she might lose the right to run for the next presidential election. So she's now tempted to get as many concessions as possible because she knows that it's not such a bad outcome for her if the government falls, because then she will be at least in a position of opposition. And then on the left, which would be the alternative for Barnier, which would be to have some support from the center-left, there have been some moves to try to make him alternative offers, but at the same time, they are still, at the moment, busy trying to cancel not only the pension reform of Emmanuel Macron, but their own pension reform of 2013. So there is no one who is ready at the moment with a serious discussion on the budget. Michel Barnier had to cancel several of his moves to make his own party happy by cancelling some pension freezing, to make Emmanuel Macron's party happy by moving back on some of the tax breaks, and to make Marine Le Pen happy by cancelling the electricity tax. So the budget, if it goes through, will already be a budget that is not very ambitious in bringing France back on track. And today, the cost of the debt for France is now higher than Greece, which might make them think twice.
And when it comes to Marine Le Pen, you mentioned her earlier, she's on trial over charges of embezzlement. You say the best way for her to survive is probably going to be by voting against the government in a no-confidence motion. Is that what you're expecting to see here next week?
Well, if she gets a lot of concessions from Barnier, it will be very difficult for her, because she went supporting that government by saying, we are the responsible party. But the problem is that the trial where she's at the moment going to likely be convicted is not something she can easily claim is the deep state punishing her. It's something that has happened quite a few times in France. Alain Juppé was a former prime minister. He had to cancel his plans to run for president for something similar. François Bayrou was a very close ally of Emmanuel Macron, justice minister. His entire career was cancelled for something similar. Nicolas Sarkozy has been convicted to firm jail sentence for something relatively similar, of taking money from his party to run a political campaign. So if she wants to have a strong claim that she's pursued by a deep state, she cannot be at the same time supporting the government. But no, Barnier is giving her a lot. Barnier is giving her this cancellation of energy tax, is trying to move on something which is very contentious, which is support for medical aid for migrants. If he actually goes cancelling that, this is something very dangerous, because this means that against pandemic, against contaminated disease, there will be less protection simply because they would stop treating foreigners. But those are the kind of thing that at the moment he's giving, because he really, really tries to keep this coalition with the far right alive.
And do you expect to see further concessions over the weekend before that potential vote next week? The far right, for example, Jordan Bardella tweeting about how they want a moratorium on the creation of new taxes and tax increases generally. The far right also seeking an increase in state pensions. So do you think that Barnier is going to move further over the weekend?
He will try to give the far right some more meat, but those are kind of difficult, because in the end, the only reason why Barnier is there is to bring France back on track for the budget. If everything he does is to throw more money at the problems, he's not solving anything. And if France has a financial collapse, even though the government survives, it's not particularly useful to him. So he might give them something, but maybe on other issues like on proportional representation or some tough discourse about migration. But giving increasing pensions today, when the main problem of France is that so much money is taken by pensions, and in particular by wealthy pensioners receiving state pension, I think this would be another kind of suicide for him. Maybe the government wouldn't collapse, but the French economic situation would collapse.
And what does happen, though, if the government does collapse? Fresh elections can't be called until next summer at the earliest.
Exactly. So there is no way to get an election now. So what would happen is that Macron would need to do what he hasn't done yet, and the center-left would need to do the same, which is to talk to each other and try to find a way forward. So the crazy thing is that the result of the election was quite clear. It was not a victory of the left. It was not a victory of the center. It was a victory of a Republican front. Everyone who decided to go together to block a far-right government. Michel Barnier, the Prime Minister, his party was not part of that. So it's really the socialist, the green, the centrist, and it could be the far left, but they don't want to be part of that. But the problem is that right now there has been no attempt to really build that kind of coalition, which would be much more legitimate. So if the government falls, they would have to try to do that. But this means also that the left, who has been very slowly rebuilding, would have to accept to take responsibility for an extremely difficult budget situation. And coming back after a few years of slowly rebuilding and having as a first move to have to cut spending and raise tax, is not something you want to do spontaneously as a party.
And you mentioned the French president there. Will he come under a lot of pressure to resign if the government does in fact fall? We saw a poll this week saying that that is what 2 in 3 voters want, if that is to be what happens next week or in the coming weeks.
Yeah, but there were similar polls before the last presidential election, and he still won it handsomely, because the question is that there is no particular alternative. If there was an election tomorrow, okay, maybe Le Pen would win, but maybe she might not be able to run anyway. But Macron, as a president, is not in charge of the government. There has been an election, there has been a result of that election, and the people who are now in parliament have one chance to show that parliamentary democracy can work. Macron resigning wouldn't change anything to that. And I don't think any reason for him to try to do that now.
And when it comes to Michel Barnier, there's been a lot of talk as well about perhaps, he's thinking about implementing the controversial Article 49.3 if it comes to it. We saw the previous government do that various times, particularly when it came to that very controversial pension reform. Do you think that Barnier is going to end up going down this path?
Yeah, he will most likely have to do that, because the way the law has been amended and re-amended and going through Senate and back, he has to go through that procedure, and that's why there will be next week a no confidence vote. So until that, the suspense is, will he give so much to Marine Le Pen that she cannot vote the no confidence and has to support him, or will a no confidence vote be go through? And if the no confidence vote go through, for Marine Le Pen, it means that she most likely will lead to a center-left government.
And opposition figures, they've been arguing this week that in the event that the government does collapse, it could still present special laws to levy taxes, for example, in the new year. They could renew spending by decree to ensure that the country keeps moving, keeps working, that public servants are able to be paid. Is that something that is possible, do you believe?
It is possible, and it will depend by how much the financial markets panic. So one of the main examples of what could happen is that if the government falls, the own member of parliament might lose their salary because the budget will not allow to pay them. But if there is a quick panic on the financial market, and we are not very far away from that at the moment, if there is a panic on financial market, you will see people moving very quickly because no one wants to be responsible for a collapse of the French economy. And I think there is a way for the French, even if the government fall, to stay resilient with that. But they would need to find eventually some form of majority of responsibility in parliament. And if it's not with the far right, it has to be with someone else.
And it really, though, isn't in any party's interest to bring down the government at this point, though, is it?
Somehow, maybe the far left dreams of the government falling to show themselves as the only alternative. Maybe somehow it's such a crazy moment for Marine Le Pen. Imagine the party is there for 50 years. For 50 years, it's her father and her keeping the tradition of running at every single presidential election and seeking power. And now they could touch it with their finger. It might be somebody else, Jordan Bardella, who get the job and maybe will betray her. So those people are maybe in state of panic and might try to make it fall. But all the others, the party of Michel Barnier, they are tiny in representation. They've never had so much power. There is no reason for it to fall. The centrists of Macron, they are in very delicate situation. They were saved by miracle by the Republican front. The Socialist Party, the Green, they had very, very good results in the last election, and they might lose everything if there is an election in a few months. So for them, there is a very strong incentive to continue. But they need to find a way to do that while not being completely unpopular, despite, again, the budgetary situation being very, very difficult.
Either way, we're in for an interesting few months. Renaud, thank you so much for joining us. That's Renaud Foucart, Senior Lecturer in Economics at Lancaster University. Well, that's it from us for now.